So let's have a look at the different connection methods using your GT10B. Invariably you're going to be either using a bass amp, or alternatively you're going to run your GT10 directly to a mixing desk. The beauty of the GT10B is that it gives you a sub output, which are basically the XLR outputs, which is a mic level that negates the need for using a DI. So generally speaking, some bass heads have DI outputs, or alternatively you would have to use an actual dedicated DI. The GT10B, however, has its own mic level output. So the great thing with using the sub output is you might want to monitor on stage using your own bass rig. So you would plug out of the 1/4 inch line level outputs straight into the front end of your bass amp. And then you can send the XLR outputs in stereo if you want, as we mentioned earlier in the output selection menu. You can send those directly to the mixing desk so that your sound guy's got complete control over your output. And if you're altering the volumes of your stage rig, it's not going to affect the sub output. So your sound guy is not going to be angry at you for affecting his mix. So that's the benefit of using the sub outputs. Another method of connection though is something you may have heard of called the 4-cable method, and we're going to have a closer look at that now because it gives you far greater control of how the effects are placed before and after the preamp in your bass rig. Okay, so our first cable is going from the bass guitar directly to the input on the GT10. The second cable I've got running from the front input of the bass amp, and I'm going to plug that into the effects send of the GT10. Okay, our next one is going from the effects return of the GT10 and find the other end, and it's going to the effects send of the amplifier. And last but not least, we've got from the left output of the GT10 directly into the effects return of the bass amp. Now, that's our basic cabling. There's a couple of other things that we need to look at as well. First of all, depending on how the effects loop is set up on the amp, it may have an actual loop level control. Now, in this case, you want to make sure that the level control on the actual bass head is set to 100% or up to full, because if you get a mix of the two different units, you may find that it may start phasing and the sound is not going to be optimal. So if it does have what's known as a parallel type loop that has a level control, then you need to set that level to 100% for the best setting. Now we're going to have a look at setting up the effects loop within the GT10 itself. Okay, so to set up the effects loop within the GT10, you need to press the master button and then use the value wheel to scroll to SR, which stands for send and return. Press enter to go into its menu, and then currently you can see that it's set to off. Press the master button again to turn it on. Okay, so if you want to hear the preamp from your actual bass rig, then you need the loop on. If you want to be able to toggle between your preamps within the GT10 and your own bass rig, you can actually set that up via assignment so that you can actually define whether certain patches have your actual bass rig sound within them or not. Okay, so pretty much the settings that we've got here, we've got the mode, which we will leave at normal because we want the preamp to be sitting in a series path, not in a parallel path. If we set it to direct mix, that would mean that it would be running in parallel, and we may find that it may start phasing. So basically set it to normal, and then you can affect the send and return level depending on how much output is coming from your amplifier. And that's pretty much it. Every single amp is going to be different. So there's, unfortunately, I can't give you any magic settings in regards to the 4-cable method, because every single amp is going to be different, and you just need to experiment with it. Some amps work really well. Other amps may just phase, and the sound may be undesirable. So in that case, you may be limited to just running to the input of the amplifier. But that's basically the 4-cable method.
Digital output.
The GT10 has a coaxial digital output, which is also known as SPDIF. This is an acronym for Sony Philips Digital Interface. This connection looks almost identical to a regular RCA connection that you may find on many home hi-fi systems, except it is capable of sending a stereo 24-bit signal through a single high-quality shielded cable. Digital coaxial cables can be bought from most electrical and hi-fi stores. Simply connect one end to your GT10 and the other to the digital input on your sound card. Just note that not all sound cards support digital. As mentioned in Chapter 1 of this DVD, the GT10 has a digital output level control so that you can ensure that your signal doesn't distort or clip. Again, access it by pressing System and then press the right cursor until you come to the Input-Output page. Press Enter and press the right cursor button until you get to page 3. Use the dial to adjust the digital output level. Whilst the digital cable is ideal for connecting to your computer when recording direct from the GT10, it should be noted that it will only deliver audio at 44.1 kHz. Should you wish to record at a higher frequency, I would recommend using quality cables directed to the GT10's left and right outputs. USB input-output. The GT10 also offers the convenience of USB connectivity that turns your GT10 into a direct recording device. The first thing that you will need to do is download the advanced USB software driver from the BOSS or Roland website and install it on your computer. Press System on your GT10 and press the right cursor button or rotate the dial until you get to the USB page and press Enter. Select Driver Mode and then select Advanced. Then exit the menu. Once installed, access the sound and audio preferences in the control panel on your computer and under the Audio tab, select GT10 as the default recording device. When you open your recording application, don't forget to also select the GT10 as your recording device. It's worth mentioning that the USB driver may have some latency. Latency is the time it takes to hear the note from when you play it, and this may make it difficult to play in time with other recorded tracks. If this is the case for you, it may help to turn the direct monitoring off within the USB menu. External devices. You might have a favourite stomp box that you want to integrate into the effects chain of the GT10. So you're going to need to know not only where to place it within the chain, but also which mode to use within the send and return menu. So let's have a look at 3 distinctly different types. So the first one I've got connected here is a direct recording box. Now, it's got its own preamp and cabinet modeling, so I can essentially bypass the amp that I've got currently selected within the GT10. So I've just got a basic rectifier model running there at the preamp, but I'll just turn that off now. And okay, so now that's just the direct signal because I still haven't basically turned on the external loop. So obviously the first thing you need to do is run a cable from the output of your stomp box to the return of the external loop, and then another cable from the input of the stomp box to the send of your external loop. Now we need to turn the loop on. Okay, so let's go into the master and then just use the value wheel and go to the send and return, press enter, and then press the master again. Now, you can hear the direct box working its magic. Now from here there's a few things that you may need to define. Now what I'm going to do is just press exit for a moment. I want to go into the effects chain and I want to ensure that I've got the loop placed in the right part of the chain. Now I'm pretty much going to just scroll to the effects chain, press enter. Now the loop, as you can see here, is pretty much at the start of the chain, but what I might do is just put it basically just next to the preamp channel itself. So it's pretty much going to be taking over from where the other preamp was. If I just press exit and go back to the loop again, or the send return menu, now you can see how I've got the menu, send return mode set to normal. That means that it's working in series, which means in the same way any other stomp box or preamp works, it's basically affecting the next part of the chain, and so on and so forth. So this next one is just a standard overdrive pedal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, overdrive pedals generally need to drive a preamp. Now, with the last demonstration of the direct box, I turned the preamp off, so there's currently no preamp running in this effects chain. So as a result, the overdrive is going to sound pretty awful. Pretty brittle, very buzzy. It's not really the sound that I really want from it. So we need to make a couple of changes to this patch to basically accommodate. Now, our send and return page is still set up how we want it to be. It's set to normal because it's still running the series. But what we do need to do is go into the preamp. Now, if we just go into the effects chain, and because I turned the preamp off, there's no cabinet modeling, so that's why the overdrive sounds horrible. It needs to run through some cabinet modeling. So if I just toggle the preamp back on, now that preamp is there you go. So the overdrive is currently now driving into whatever preamp I had set on this patch. And if we jump out of there and go into the preamp, we can see that I've got a rectifier. So the overdrive is actually driving that rectifier. If I turn the stomp box off, just quickly. So there you have it. So now the overdrive is driving the preamp. But here's another little cool trick. If I change the rectifier to a clean model, say something like maybe even just the full range. Full range basically just gives me a totally flat amplifier to start with. So this can work equally as well if you use one of the internal overdrives before a full range amp. The great thing with this is that it basically gives you a lot of control using the preamp tone stack control. So for instance, you can hear how much those controls are affecting the sound of the stomp box. So basically now I'm using the overdrive into a totally clean amp, and I'm using the cabinet modeling from the full range amp, and I can set that to whatever I want. In this case, let's see, I'll put it to an 8x12 cabinet. So our last example is using this reverb pedal. Now, there are a few changes that I need to make here to use this reverb pedal in its optimal setup. So the first thing I want to do is just change the preamp mode. Now, for the last example, I had it set to full range. I just want to select just a straight out clean sound, say a JC120. There we go. Now there's a lot of reverb going on there, and it's getting cut off by the noise suppressor because I haven't got it set, first of all, to the right loop mode, and secondly, I've got it in the wrong place in the effects chain. So let's first of all put it in the right place in the effects chain. So let's go into master and effects chain. Now the send and return is placed before the preamp. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we want our time-based effects like delay and reverb to be
after the noise suppression. So let's just use the dial and put the loop, let's just say put it in this last part of the series chain so that it's affecting both sides of the parallel loop. So now, okay, so it's in the right spot now, but still a little bit too much reverb, and I need to change the actual loop mode to better control that. Now, if I just exit out of the effects chain and then go to the loop, okay, so it's currently set to normal, which means that the effects are passing totally through to the reverb, and then the entire signal is then passing to the next effect in the block. In this case, I want to make it parallel. So if I change it to basically direct mix, that means that now I can control how much of the signal is coming back in using the return level here. So if I just use the down cursor and just dial that all the way down to 0 for a sec, you can see that I've totally taken all of the reverb signal out of the chain. As I dial it back up, beautiful. Okay, so this is a really handy thing to know, because rather than having your reverb set up in different patches and then having to use the effects level for different patches, you might want a little bit of reverb in this patch and then lots in the next patch. All you do is program your patch and save it with the amount of return level. So keep your external pedals effects level to 100, totally full, so that you control the entire effects level from the GT10 itself. So I can basically turn this to whatever I want, save it with the patch, and then as I change to those patches, the reverb level will always be reflected by the written state.